The day Ben was forced by his dad to get engaged to me, his girlfriend Mary died in a car accident on her way to see him. After the engagement, he spent night after night hopping from club to club, letting the rumors fly. That made me the biggest joke around. When I confronted him, Ben just smirked. "You went so far as to cost a life just to marry me, so now suck it up," he said. Then, one unexpected incident changed everything. Both of us somehow traveled back in time to just before the engagement. Without a second thought, he grabbed Mary's hand and broke off the engagement with me in front of everyone. Later, I announced the engagement would still happen as planned. Ben coldly informed me, "Forcing me won't work. I'm not coming to the engagement party." I fell silent for a moment. Should I tell him now that my new fiancé is his uncle? I stared, stunned, at the familiar scene before me. Ben's grandfather slowly spoke from the head of the table. "Considering you're both about to graduate college, now's the time to set the engagement date." It finally hit me, I had come back to life, too. Before I could sort out my messy thoughts, a familiar voice came from beside me. "I don't agree." Ben, with cold eyes, said words entirely different from before. "I have someone I like, but it's not Kathy." He glanced at me. "This engagement can't happen." Suddenly, I realized I wasn't the only one who had come back to life. Ben's grandfather held back his anger. "And who are you to argue with me?" Ben smiled at me, speaking casually. "If I've already said I don't like you, and you still want to marry me, there's something wrong with you." The next second, Ben's grandfather threw his chopsticks at him. "You disgrace." Ben stood up slowly. "You want me to marry Kathy just to get an heir from a family alliance, right?" His smile carried a hint of arrogance. "Otherwise, how about I take her to a hotel tonight? If she gets pregnant, I wouldn't have to marry her, right?" Ben successfully pissed off his grandfather. He threw his glass of water straight at Ben's forehead. Ben laughed bitterly at himself. He shot me a glance before leaving. "Kathy, go after him." Ben's grandfather gasped for air, struggling to get out the words. Amid the urging of everyone, I had no choice but to follow him out. My initial plan was to return to school immediately. But as soon as I stepped out of the restaurant, I ran into Ben and his girl, Mary. "What do you want?" Ben shielded Mary behind him, his gaze distant as he looked at me. In our past life, Mary had received an anonymous message about our engagement, leading her to the accident. Ben always believed that message came from me. I spoke briskly. "Grandpa wants you back." Mary anxiously tugged on Ben's sleeve. "Ben, don't go." He soothed her, patting her head, before turning back to me. "I've already made it clear, there's no way I'm getting engaged or married to you." Impatience was evident in his eyes. "And please, stop hounding me." His firmness was actually a relief. In this life, we wouldn't have to be tied together. Any feelings I had for Ben were long gone, worn out by his public humiliations with other women in our past life. I intended to bypass them and head back to school. But Mary called out to me. "Kathy, can you promise me something?" I stopped. "Promise what?" She anxiously bit her lip. "Promise you won't bother Ben again. I saw your diary while inspecting your dorm last time. It said you liked Ben, right?" Mary's voice was soft but firm. "So as Ben's official girlfriend now, I ask you to stay away and understand." I stepped forward, meeting her eyes. "You were snooping through my things?" "In high school, my diary was always in my drawer." Mary backed away, timidly. "It was just routine hygiene inspection." Ben frowned, placing her behind him. "That's enough, Kathy. She didn't mean any harm." He quietly reassured. "There's nothing you need to promise. I don't like her, so it's pointless for her to cling." With that, he prepared to leave with Mary. That diary held confessions I wasn't brave enough to voice. How could she rummage through my stuff without permission and still feel so justified? I caught up to her on the street, grabbing her arm. Don't you think you owe me an apology? Mary bit her lip, stubborn. I don't think I did anything wrong. I laughed in disbelief. Your manners teach you it's okay to go through other people's things? That line seemed to shake her deeply. Her eyes welled up with tears almost instantly. Enough, Kathy. Ben impatiently pulled my hand away. In the next moment, the traffic light turned green at the corner. A car hurtled towards us. With no time to react, almost instinctively, Ben pulled Mary aside. The screech of the brakes was deafening. Luckily, I only suffered a minor scrape on my ankle and fell to the ground. Mary, are you hurt? Ben checked her over, relieved beyond belief. Their closeness drowned out the driver's curses as he drove off unnoticed. Once Ben was sure she was okay, he finally turned his attention to me, struggling to get up. The streetlight cast flickering shadows as I locked eyes with Ben without a word. After a long silence, he laughed softly. He asked me with a curious air, "Do you think this is karma?" He never stopped blaming me for Mary's accident in our past life. No matter how many times I explained. I drew my gaze away from the departing couple, ignoring the pain as I stood. Brushing off the dust, I thought to myself, at least I don't like him anymore. And it won't make me sad anymore. After that, Ben's grandmother frequently invited me to their house. She pleaded with me not to take things out on Ben. No matter what I said, she seemed not to hear it. Ben's gotten so stubborn now, only his uncle can manage him, she stressed. Ben's uncle, Ken, was the real power in their family. Our only interaction had been a year before. I'd gotten drunk and played truth or dare, ending up kissing a stranger at the next table. When Ben introduced Ken as his uncle later, I wanted to dig a hole and hide. In the middle of our talk, Ben's grandma suddenly had a bright idea. She clapped her hands, murmuring to herself. That's it. At that time, I didn't really get what she meant. A week later, I found myself tricked into Ben's grandma's hotel. I was soaked, and she handed me a room card. Go up and wait a bit, someone will bring you clean clothes soon. But when I swiped the card, opened the door, and turned on the light, I froze. The room had an unusual smell. There was a man with his tie hanging loosely around his shirt, leaning against the bed, not even bothering to look up. His voice was raspy. Get out. It was Ken. That's when I finally understood what the smell was. I quickly turned to open the door, but it wouldn't budge, clearly locked from the outside. What's going on, Grandma? I told you to get out. Don't you understand? His voice was now tinged with irritation. I want to get out, but I can't open the door, I muttered back, still twisting the handle. Ken paused his breathing, and then I heard footsteps coming closer. Why is it you? He grabbed my arm to make me face him. That's when I felt the heat from his palm making me shiver. Uncle, I called out earnestly, trying to remind him of who I was. Ken didn't respond, just stared at me with hooded eyes. I heard Ben called off the engagement with you. I nodded, unsure why he was bringing this up now. He seemed to step a little closer, his Adam's apple moving slightly. So, you don't like him anymore? I unknowingly breathed in a lot, feeling a bit slow to react, only able to answer plainly, no, I don't. He smirked slightly, not really asking, just confirming. Is that so? I looked up at him, confused and honest. The heat in the air stirred a subtle irritability I couldn't quite put a name to, as I instinctively searched for a way to ease it. Mr. Ken. He smiled faintly, his hand brushing against my cheek. Uncomfortable? I didn't answer, just found myself staring at his lips, wondering if they felt as cool as Jell-O from the fridge. Speak. His eyes wavered with emotion, but his logical tone just highlighted how impatient I seemed. I reached on my toes, climbing on his shoulders. But his phone rang at the wrong time. Ken clicked his tongue, intending to toss it aside, but stopped when he saw who was calling, eventually answering it. Uncle, you're back in the country? It was Ben. A bit of sense returned to me. I met Ken's gaze, my attempt to kiss frozen in place. Ken grunted in response, using his other hand to pull me closer to him. Our lips almost touched. "Where are you now, Uncle?" "I'll come find you," Ben's voice came through the phone. Panic struck me, and I accidentally bumped Ken's collarbone as I clutched his shirt. Ken hissed softly, "Easy, will ya?" Dizzy, I mumbled an apology, "I didn't mean to." The line went silent for a moment. "Uncle, who are you talking to?" "I think I recognized that voice," Ben continued. I stared wide-eyed in panic. Ken said, "Your aunt," before hanging up. But I wasn't focused on that. My attention was completely on the person in front of me, already feeling out of it. He picked me up and walked further inside, questioning with eager curiosity, "Do you want to do something?" Ken sat on the bed with me on his lap. I nodded eagerly, trying to lean in for a kiss. He chuckled and turned his head, grabbing my chin to stop me. "Playing with me isn't gonna work. I'm too old for hit-and-run games." Is 6 years a big age difference? "So, if you don't take responsibility, I'd totally call the cops." Got it? It felt like standing under a plum tree, with parched lips and longing eyes, craving the sweet fruit that couldn't quench my thirst unless I tasted it. After I promised multiple times, he finally brought that plum closer to my lips. I kissed lightly, but out of inexperience, quickly pulled back. Ken instinctively leaned in, yet stopped just before touching me. "If you keep being so half-hearted, you better not even try," he challenged, his steady voice with a hint of playful coaxing. "Open your mouth and move closer yourself." I wrapped my arms around his neck and leaned in again. But this time, he didn't let me escape easily, keeping me tangled up. Meanwhile, Ben finished his call and arrived at his family home. He couldn't shake the familiar voice from the call. While in deep thought, he opened the door. His grandma, sitting on the couch munching on an apple, looked at him as though she'd seen a ghost. "Ah. Ben. What are you doing here?" "No classes at the department today, thought I'd visit." The realization hit her quickly. She checked her phone frantically, realizing the message meant for Ben had mistakenly gone to Ken over an hour ago. Her mind went blank. She had planned on setting Ben up at the hotel, not realizing she had arranged things for someone else. "Please don't try to set up Kathy and me anymore," Ben stated, ready for his grandma's usual lengthy speech. But this time, she was uncharacteristically quiet for a long moment before agreeing. "I plan to set up Kathy with your Uncle Ken instead." Ben paused, his phone checking. He couldn't process his emotions well at that moment. He had always subconsciously seen Kathy as his fiancée, someone who belonged to him. Now, hearing she might marry someone else brought a wave of unexplainable annoyance. So, he casually dismissed, "Not gonna happen. Ken isn't interested in Kathy, and she has someone she likes anyway." His grandma scoffed, "Aren't you into Mary? Then why care so much? I even planned to tell Mary about your engagement with Kathy to make her give up completely." Ben froze, his phone slipping from his hand. "What did you say?" "So, that message from before really wasn't sent by Kathy, huh?" What Ben didn't know was, his supposedly uninterested Uncle Ken was over there overwhelming me with questions and, other things. The Ken I knew wasn't the talkative type. I couldn't understand the point of his endless questions. He uncurled my tightly clenched hand from the pillow, interlacing his fingers with mine. Looking down at me, he asked, "Who am I?" I dodged the question. He made me look at him. Sweat dripped from his damp bangs. His clear eyes were especially sexy at that moment. He asked slowly, "Wanna check the mirror?" I had no choice but to give in. "Ken." "Say it again." "Ken." How pathetic, why couldn't I be unconscious like in the novels and escape this mess? At least I was facing away from Ken, pretending to play dead. "Don't pretend, I know you're awake." His teasing voice shattered the dignity I tried hard to maintain. "Stay calm." I closed my eyes, determined to continue the act of playing dead. Ken let out a soft sneer. Forget it. Then carry on. Suddenly, my ankle was grasped. I reacted instantly, eyes wide open. Awake now? He looked down at me. My ears started turning red. I pursed my lips in silence. Ken stood, casually tying his robe. Walked over to the cabinet and turned on his phone. A few seconds later, he showed me the screen. Seeing the big Kathy 0 on it made my blood pressure skyrocket. He had a teasing expression. Remember what I told you before? Was he gonna call me out for freeloading? Just as I was stressing about how to respond, someone banged on the door. Kathy, I know you're in there. Open up, I need to talk to you. It was Ben. More trouble. I looked helplessly at the door, overwhelmed. Ben kept insisting outside. Ken had enough. With a slight frown, he opened the door. What do you need that can't wait? Ben was stunned for a couple of seconds. Uncle, what are you doing here? Didn't Grandma say Kathy was here? Nestled under the covers, I felt hopeless. Though I hadn't heard Ken's response, I braced myself for the coming storm. Is your girlfriend inside? Ben remembered the phone call from earlier. Grandma must have been mistaken, I'll go to Kathy's place and ask. He smiled knowingly. Won't disturb you too. Say hi to Auntie for me. I was still processing it when Ken closed the door again. A crisis I couldn't avoid was solved by Ben's lack of insight. Ken turned to me. Panicked, I grabbed my phone to distract myself from discussing what had just happened. What are you doing? I bit my lips. Buying some meds. Ken raised an eyebrow. What kind? I paused a moment, then admitted it. Birth control. A soft laugh came from above. His face calm and satisfied, but his words were totally flaky. Why bother? I tightened my grip on the blanket, feeling a bit peeved. Because of you. What about me? Ken's expression remained unchanged, and I felt a twinge of sadness. I stopped arguing, silently searching for the meds. In a flash, he snatched my phone away. He gently nudged my lightly reddened eyes, speaking softly. No need for that. I use protection. I froze, trying to remember if that actually happened. Ken thought I doubted him and added patiently. Every time. He pointed to the trash can, teasing. One account? I didn't actually count but began recalling fragmented memories. With Ben's grandma's strong fragrant incense, I acted like I'd never seen a man before. Ken had avoided my kiss, soothing me softly. Wait a moment. I chased after, murmuring, I can't wait. He took a deep breath, reaching for something on the nightstand. I nudged his ear again, disappointedly asking. No kissing? The restraint in Ken's eyes broke apart. No more of that fragrance for you. Confused, I sat there. Before Ken leaned back in for a kiss, he added one word to clarify. I can't handle it. All the embarrassment numbed me by now. So when Ken offered to carry me to the bathroom, I hesitated only briefly. Then stretched my arms out to him. Thanks for the help. Ken's breath carried a light laugh. He carried me to the bathroom. No problem. That day Ken once again asked if I'd be responsible for him. Seeing my indecision, he didn't push me further. Just said. Your dad's company is facing a financial crunch, and Ben canceled the engagement. They'll soon find you a new match. The next morning. As I headed home, I couldn't stop thinking about Ken's words. However, when I saw Ben downstairs, that thought took a back seat. His eyes showed exhaustion, his voice colder than the morning mist. Explain why you didn't answer last night, didn't come home, where were you? I looked away. None of your business. Since leaving the hotel yesterday afternoon, I hadn't slept and was too exhausted to deal with my dad, so I stayed at my closest apartment. No need to explain that to Ben. As he got closer, the chill from his clothes intensified. Not your business? He gave a slight smile. Kathy, our cancelled engagement isn't public yet. Technically, I'm still your fiancé, and you're not home all night? Ben's accusatory tone felt way too familiar from the past life. Once before, while on a short business trip during an internship, I didn't notify anyone. I found Ben outside my apartment on the third day, with lipstick stains still smeared on his neck. Yet he furiously demanded to know my whereabouts. Comparing the man before me to my memories, his appearance felt absurd. Picking up Mary in public was before canceling our engagement, wasn't it? Ben glared for a while, irritation unmasked. He coldly curled his lips. You know what annoys me the most about you? His look was both judging and critical. Your pettiness, jealousy, it's just obnoxious, Kathy. You don't realize how utterly unbearable you are? I was frozen for a moment. All I was doing was stating facts to counter him. I never thought he'd see it as jealousy. Ben shook his head and backed away from me, putting some distance between us. I thought I might have misunderstood you. But now, even if you didn't do that, you're still just envious and petty. You're really no match for Mary. He dropped that last line and looked at me with disappointment. Ben. I called out to the person ready to leave. Even if I was jealous, it wouldn't be for you. You're so full of yourself. Don't hang around me anymore. You come to me even once, and I'll call the cops. With that, I turned and headed straight back to my apartment. Jealousy, over the top. I heard it so many times in the past. From Ben's harsh accusations to his later offhand sarcasm, it was always something. Now, with all emotions for Ben stripped away, standing from an outsider's perspective, I think back on it all. I've realized I wasted way too much time tangled up with Ben unnecessarily. After that day, Ben unilaterally announced the cancellation of our engagement. Ken was right. The next day, my dad hurried to introduce me to a new potential marriage match. My initial plan was to meet once and brush it off. But an unexpected thing happened right from the start. To be honest, I kinda like your style. Sitting across from me in the restaurant was my blind date, the elegant young Master Jack, launching straight into honesty hour. But I couldn't join him. Because if I told him his foot odor was so bad it made it impossible for me to eat anything, he'd likely get up and leave. And then my dad would terribly scold me. As I was caught in this blues, a familiar voice joined his conversation. Who do you like? I instinctively looked up. Ken had his suit jacket draped over one arm, his top shirt button undone, no tie, a bit disheveled. He had this charm born from mingling with high society. He gave Jack a look, the smile never quite reaching his eyes. Ken. Jack jumped up. Oh, what a coincidence, I'm on a date. Almost instantly, a heated gaze landed right on me. If Ken's glare could be translated into actual heat, I'm pretty sure I'd be bald by now. Ken, how about joining us for a bite? Jack nervously asked since Ken hadn't left. Surprisingly, he really sat down. You guys keep chatting, pretend I'm not here. Jack glanced at Ken, struggled to speak while looking at me. Overall, I'm quite satisfied with you. But there's something I particularly mind and want to ask. While Ken absent-mindedly toyed with a broccoli piece on his fork, I turned my attention back to Jack and nodded. Is that still around? I was startled. What? He smacked his lips, a bit embarrassed. Well, your first time, I care about that. Ken's hands paused. I couldn't help but clench my hand under the table. This overwhelming discomfort was about to crash over me. Just as I was about to say something, from the corner of my eye, Ken's fork clattered onto the table. What's wrong, Ken? Is it not to your taste? Let me order something else for you. Ken chuckled coldly. No, I just find you quite amusing. He scrutinized Jack. A guy who spends every night with different women, and you're here expecting a girl to wait 20 years for you for the first time, huh? Jack's face turned red, yet he still believed he was in the right. Ken, you don't know how Kathy's family now is no different than selling a daughter. I'm only lowering the bar because she looks decent. Honestly, even if I demanded her to be the perfect vintage wife post-marriage, she'd just have to comply. I listened silently, hand already reaching for the soup in front of me. I thought, in the next second, this bowl of soup was going over his head. I was done for the night, patience dried up. The further this jerk rolls, the better. Ken seemed to notice my intentions. The soup in front of me was taken away by him. Ken knocked the soup toward Jack, smiling as he tapped the table. Do you even know who you are? Next second, without warning, he pressed Jack's neck, forcing his face near the soup bowl. Ken's eyes flashed with a brazen rebelliousness. She didn't even choose me, what makes you think she's gonna pick you? You're just another trust fund kid hanging on to your dad's coattails. Jack sputtered, choked on soup, as Ken finally let go. Ken leaned back, relaxed, wiping the soup on the back of his hand. Without looking up, he ordered. Get lost. And tell your family to personally explain to me tomorrow. After that guy left, he finally looked at me. I was propping my chin up, smiling at him with amusement. Ken snorted in annoyance. What are you laughing at? You just slept with me, and now you're immediately dating this guy. I haven't even called you out for it. Hearing that, I did feel a pinch of guilt. With Jack's stinky feet out, my appetite came rushing back. I ate and drank quite a few drinks. By the time the bill came, I was already a bit tipsy. No worries, Ken, I got this, I got it. I insisted on the time-honored tradition of fighting for the check. The server was professionally polite with a smile. No need, Miss Kathy, Mr. Ken always charges it. I paused my payment checking motion and blinked. Ken didn't give me any time to react, walked right on over to me. Can you still walk yourself? I thought for a moment, allowing my face to contort shamelessly. Then carry me home, I might barely allow it. Ken chuckled gently, and in full view of everyone, he scooped me up and confidently walked out. The man's familiar fresh scent was back in my nose, sweeping away the near-hour-long funk left by Jack. My nose was nearly touching Ken's collarbone. I couldn't help but sniff a little closer. Ken lowered his eyes, keeping a flat tone. Have I forgiven you for being all cutesy? That's what he said, but he hugged me a bit tighter. I was dozing off in his arms until a familiar voice came through. Uncle? Why are you with Kathy? I groggily opened my eyes from Ken's shoulder. Ben gave me a complicated look, with Mary standing beside him. Ken glanced at him. Do I need to report who I'm with to you? Ben pursed his lips, his eyes landing on Ken's arms around me. Has Kathy drunk too much? This is just like her. A little alcohol and she's out. Uncle, I know her. Just hand her over to me, so she won't trouble you when she gets wild. Hearing this jolted me awake. I looked wide-eyed at Ken, who showed no intention of letting go, then at Ben. Two words instinctively left my mouth. Jerk. My face darkened. Acting all tough with backup vanished immediately, and I clung tightly to Ken's neck, quietly pleading. Don't pass me over to him. Ken laughed, his chest shaking, saying two simple words before stepping away. The next time I linked up my memory chain was the next morning. Rubbing my dizzy head, I prepared myself mentally while heading downstairs. I was all ready to get yelled at by Dad. But seeing his surprisingly gentle expression was scarier than seeing a ghost. Kathy, how'd you sleep? I was too scared to say a word. Oh, my daughter really stepped up her game. You're marrying the cream of the crop. I paused for a few seconds before tentatively asking. Are you planning on marrying me off to that 57-year-old man? Dad's smile froze for a moment. Being with Ken really changed you, went from silly to charming. I froze again. Images of last night rushed into my mind. Ken had brought me to my doorstep. I was struggling with the seatbelt, and he leaned in to help. I suddenly looked up, just grazing the corner of his lips. Ken didn't move, his gaze slowly traveling from my eyes to just below my nose. In the cramped space, the slightly heavier breathing made the atmosphere tense. Just when I thought Ken might do something, he suddenly pulled back, pressing my chin, separating us as his smirk grew ironic. "I'm not giving you another chance to take advantage of me for free." The alcohol had kicked in my flirty side. I longingly watched Ken's lips, pursing mine in defeat. I vividly remember that Ken knew how to kiss, and to avoid getting kissed by me, he was very proper in guiding me into the house. Dad was shocked to see Ken, but soon wore a big smile. I can't remember what they said. The only thing that stuck was Ken leaning close to whisper, his voice low enough only for me to hear. "Agree to marry me, and I'll let you kiss." As if worried I wouldn't agree, he added more to his offer, "Kiss as much as you want." Was he fooling me like an idiot? The word marriage snapped me awake for a second. Ken, who helped fend off Jack tonight, did make me feel a flicker. Plus, Dad pushing for a marriage alliance to benefit him was a sure thing. In front of everyone, I finally agreed to the marriage with Ken in a mostly sober state. Yes, it was a marriage alliance. At the time, to me, even with faint feelings as bonus conditions, it still seemed like a compromise-based marriage. A decision made weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't until much later, realizing everything Ken did for me was out of love, that it dawned on me, maybe perhaps a bit later, or if I had a choice. But the truth would have stayed the same. In broad terms, with any initial condition, the conclusion that I'd fall in love and marry Ken holds true. Ben's grandma probably felt guilty. She never contacted me after that day. Only after the engagement date was set did she call, inviting me for lunch. Upon arriving, I see Ben was there, but Ken was still on his way back. Ben's grandma awkwardly took a few steps to greet me with forced laughter. "Haha, Kathy, you're here, haha." I looked at her fake smile, at a loss for words. When only Ben and I were left in the living room, he furrowed his brow to speak. "You're here to talk about the engagement?" I nodded, not wanting to say much to him. "Kathy, do you think you're making sense?" His voice carried irritation. I looked at him, not quite understanding. "I admit, I've realized I kind of like you now. But pushing me into marriage with the elders will backfire, don't you get it?" I was stunned speechless. Ben stood up, dusting off his hoodie. Looking down at me, he still carried that unreachable attitude. "Forced marriage won't work. If I don't attend the engagement, it's your embarrassment." I opened my mouth to argue but closed it after all. This was Ben's house. Would yelling at him right now be inappropriate? Ben's arrogance finally crashed at the dining table. With the crisp sound of chopsticks hitting the floor, Ben's eyes trembled slightly. "What are you saying? Uncle and Kathy's engagement?" He let out a ridiculous laugh. "No way. They are not even in the same generation." Ken nonchalantly agreed. "Soon, you won't be in the same generation either. Remember to call her Aunt Kathy." I was contemplating whether to display a loving, forgiving elder look toward Ben when he pushed away his bowl, storming back to his room. Ken had a bit too much to drink that night. As soon as he got in the car, he instructed the driver to raise the partition. My alert level skyrocketed instantly. Any experimental words were interrupted by Ben chasing after us. "Uncle, are you sure you want to marry her?" Ken lazily leaned back against the seat, pressing down the window. Ben looked past him, eyeing me with a look of disdainful amusement. As if he'd already foreseen the disaster of my impending defeat. "Uncle, you probably have no idea, but the person you're about to marry once had a very low and humble crush on me." Ken bit his cigarette, lighting it without showing any emotion. But for some reason, that made me a little nervous. Ben found my reaction very satisfying, and he laughed, his tone becoming even more leisurely. "Kathy's got this notebook filled with all the things she did while secretly crushing on me. Uncle, you sure you want to marry someone who's had a thing for your nephew? My hand clenched tighter every time he spoke. After all, Ben's Ken's nephew. The odds of him siding with me are way less than him trusting his own kin. Especially since this embarrasses him. Ken's holding a cigarette, leaning on the window. He signals me to look at Ben. When our eyes meet, Ben gives me this smug grin. See that, Kathy? Uncle wants you to come with me. Why would he want you? Ken doesn't even bother with him. He just asks me, did you hear what he called you? I can't read his intentions, so I just nod silently. He blocks out the light, closing in on me with a barely there smirk. His voice is almost tempting. Kathy, don't chicken out. Yell back. I'm shocked, staring at him in disbelief. He's not just backing me up. He's giving me the courage to do whatever I want. He squints slightly, raising a brow. Like now. Doesn't yelling back feel better? He had me convinced. Without even realizing it, I lean out the window. Before I say anything, I look back at Ken, hesitating for confirmation. You'll back me up, right? He lets out a quiet "hmm." I press my lips together, eyes steady on Ben. My hand at the window balls into a fist. In that weirdly silent moment. Screw you, Ben. My biggest disgrace is that stupid notebook. Tomorrow, I'm getting a new one, and it's gonna be filled with curses about you. Ben's face changes, not expecting Ken to react this way. He glares at me, fuming. Even after the driver pulls away, I'm still riding the high of the showdown. I don't even realize that to get at Ben, I'd leaned all the way out. Now, I'm kneeling on Ken's lap. Feel better? His lazy smile hints at sly teasing. It feels like the question means more than one thing. I'm clueless if he's talking about yelling at Ben or this moment. As I'm trying to play it cool and get off his lap, the driver stops suddenly. I fall right into Ken's arms, feeling something soft pressing against my back. I reach back instinctively. What you grabbing? Ken half smiles, catching my hand. I'm still on his lap, and I blurt out, I felt something soft, probably a cigarette pack in his pocket. Ken's eyes slowly rise, his hand warm around mine. You sure that's what you've got? The car's so dimly lit that when I look down at my hand, a streetlight spills in, showing everything clear as day. I nearly gasp. I snatch my hand away, trying to get off Ken's lap. But he's not having it, pulling me back onto him. Ken can't let go. You said soft? I want to cry. No. And what is it then? Ken's probing for answers. Without thinking, I slap my hand over his face. Stop talking, please. Ken doesn't brush my hand off. He just shifts me so I'm sitting on him. You think that'll shut me up? His warm breath tickles my palm and my heart. His voice sneaks through my fingers, low and teasing. I pull my hand back, unsure, meeting his gaze. Ken's wearing a playful smirk. Maybe there's a better way to stop me? Moonlight's lighting up his face, giving him this cool, clean look. My heart beats all over the place, breaking my calm facade. No doubt, Ken's got me wrapped around his finger. Before I know it, I'm climbing up his shoulder, leaning in closer. Our eyes land on each other's lips before locking. That's when the memory kicks in of that day we first kissed. I blame the booze Ken must have had, 'cause he's got full control now. One hand's to my jaw, and he's prying my mouth open, fixing the angle, then shifting again, going for another round. In a brief moment of clarity, I push at his shoulder. The driver can't hear us. Ken cuts in, breath barely stable. Now, come here. Then I'm pulled back into his spiral. Ben never ended up with Mary. He broke the news to me himself while I was doing a group project at a local cafe. He pulls out a chair and sits down. Heard from Grandma that you and Ken are getting hitched soon. It's the first time Ben's used Ken's full uncle title, and I look up at him. His eyes look tired, like no amount of good stuff could hide it. I once dreamt about you, Kathy, he chuckles, shaking his head. In the dream, I hurt you a lot due to misunderstandings, but what comforted me was your feelings for me stayed the same. His eyes drop, mixing a gentle smile with bitterness. Guess dreams and reality really are opposite. Reality's you not into me yet, and I haven't even done anything. I don't have the energy to untangle this mess. But then I remember something, pulling out a ring with my initials. I'm about to give it back to Ben when he eyes it, speaking softly, so you guys even have matching couple rings. It sounds simple, but it doesn't click. What? Saw Ken had the same ring when I was over last time. Didn't think the matching one would be yours. It suddenly hits me like I'm drowning, and his voice is dragging me deeper into memories. Back then, I had a feeling Ben liked Mary. I was sad but didn't want to get in their way. Just when I was planning to talk to Ben, I got this gift box claiming it was from his family. Inside was this very ring. I thought it was from Ben. Never crossed my mind it was Ken. So, that night, when Ben found me, I jumped into his arms, confessing boldly. Ben, I really like you. He didn't push me away, just quietly holding me tight. I know. What about you? I asked hopefully, lifting my head from his chest. Ben pushed my head back against him so I couldn't see his expression. I've never said I didn't like you, he replied ambiguously. The subtleties of his words were overshadowed by my dopamine-high brain at the time. Honestly, if not for this ring, it probably wouldn't have led to our engagement. Kathy? Ben's voice snapped me back to reality. I glanced at the ring again and put it on instinctively. What did you call me? Ben didn't realize I was setting him up. Kathy. I gave him a long missed smile. Remember, you'll soon have to call me Auntie. Ben walked away without saying a word. I nodded at his retreating figure, satisfied he wouldn't bother me again. I didn't question Ken about the ring right away. But it puzzled me. It was obviously from him, so why didn't he mention it? I stared at the ring, trying to recall my memories of Ken from the past. Finally, I remembered the day I confessed to Ben. Lifting my head from Ben's chest, I had seen a Cullinan facing us over his shoulder. It was too late, and I couldn't see who was inside before the car drove off into the quiet autumn night. Recently, I saw the same Cullinan in Ken's garage. I reckon he didn't refuse outright because he'd seen what it looked like to have me as a lover and didn't want to try again. Until the day of our engagement, Ken didn't put the ring on. The engagement party went smoothly from start to finish. The only thing that bothered me was something an intern friend said. Her husband is 7 or 8 years older than her. She looked at me with the eyes of someone who's been there. Kathy, be a bit more understanding of your husband, she said, patting my shoulder. I looked at her, confused. Consider this a heads up. Age means he might get worn out sooner. What's that supposed to mean? She sighed quietly. The older a man gets, the less energy he has. My husband, for example, becomes drained just as I'm warming up, quicker than I can read a short story. He told me all men are like this. It was my first time hearing this. Though surprised, I thought it over. It seemed like a real issue, so I sincerely asked for advice. Any solutions? She shook her head, blushing. You can't rely on men, she said. I have an electronic friend now. I could send you the link, it works better than a real person. I expected some miraculous health tip but let go of it as I left the room. Ken was just outside. Seeing him there didn't bother me, he must have just arrived. That night, Ken made sure I didn't drink much. He intercepted almost every drink offered to me. I gazed fondly at my fiancé, feeling so much love, which quickly evaporated. In his apartment, Ken pinned me to the couch, trapping my legs with his knees. He lightly patted my face. Tell me, what's this electronic friend thing about? His voice, colored by alcohol, was sexy and a bit husky. I realized he heard everything. I didn't plan to buy one. I whispered in defense. Originally, I thought of getting you some supplements. If I'd known I'd nearly lose half my life over this, I'd rather admit to the electronics than deny it so thoughtlessly. I couldn't recall when we moved from the couch to the bedroom. Face buried in a pillow, his hand, wearing a matching ring, covered mine. Our fingers intertwined, the rings lightly clicking against each other. Soon, he flipped me over. I hate to use the word conquer, but at this moment, that's exactly what Ken was doing. Like electronics? My voice, hoarse from crying, shook with desperation as I shook my head. No, I don't. I only like you. In that moment, it felt like the pirate ship suddenly stopped. Everything stood still, and it was a strange experience. Really? Ken asked, looking down at me. My face turned shy. It took a while to meet his clear, slightly anxious gaze. I sniffled, wrapping my arms around his neck. Really? Ken, today's the day I realized I truly liked you. Well, not exactly. Tracing back, I liked him yesterday, a month ago, and during those moments when feelings started to grow. But today, I voiced it out loud, so I chose today as the first day of officially liking him. Ken responded with a deep, somewhat greedy kiss. Catching my breath, he admitted softly. I wasn't not long before. The next afternoon, I sat in the study with a new journal ready. I wrote down yesterday's date. Then, in a bold mood, I penned. First day of liking Ken, nearly cost me half my life. Danger level rather high, planning to lower my affection by 0.1% today. If he lets me sleep peacefully through the night, affection might go up by 10%. As a shaft of afternoon light crawled from my ring finger to my index finger, I finally put down my pen. Before closing the notebook, a thought hit me. I turned back to the introduction page and carefully wrote a few words. Recording moments of heart flutter,